Writing. So before we begin the official summary of the article, would you be able to give us and the viewers a brief summary of who you are and the kinds of research that you're interested in doing?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I'm a 66-year-old Australian woman, and I was born in Fiji and I lived there until I was 11. I'm going to kind of give you some of my background because it kind of explains why I did this study. So, as a little girl, I spent quite a lot of time in the local Indian neighborhood. And I played school with other little girls there. And I also went to their Hindu temple and participated in Hindu wedding preparations. And I ate very hot curries. And so Fiji Indian ways of doing were part of my life, as well as my parents' Australian educated middle class habits, values, and expectations. So after I was 11, I went to do some high school years. I did my high school years in Hong Kong, and then I went to Europe for 12 years where I got an honours degree in history of ideas. That was in England. And I worked mostly with children and their families in Italy, France, and South London. So, but my transnational life showed me that there are many valid ways to raise children, and that child rearing reflects parents' goals for their children and parents' ideologies about appropriate and inappropriate ways of talking and behaving. So that was my lesson from my life, I guess, at that point. After I moved with my young son to Adelaide, which is on Gauna land in Australia, I completed a graduate certificate in child development and started working as a junior academic in the School of Education at the University of South Australia, which will soon be called Adelaide University. In 2004, I did a quantitative study for a master's by research, and then I published quantitative and qualitative research on various early childhood related topics. But during this time, I was most interested in how very young children acquire their families' ways of doing, thinking, and talking. And my interest was fed by some of the language socialization literature as well as Rogoff's work. I've never done an anthropology or linguistics course, but it seems there are many roads to publication in the prestigious Journal of Linguistic Anthropology. In 2013, I was part of a team that won a substantial grant for an action research study on preschool children's literacy learning in their families and communities in Fiji. At that point, I decided to undertake a doctoral investigation on very young children's language and cultural learning in Fiji, which is my heart's home. My doctoral study investigated very young children's language socialization in an Indo-Fijian community. In other words, it looked at how very young children drew on familial interactions and activities to learn their families' ways of talking, thinking, and doing. And also, the study investigated how this learning was guided by their community's beliefs about acceptable speech and conduct. My article in the Journal of Linguistic Anthropology elaborates on some of my doctoral study's findings.
That's so interesting how, like, I guess your life's path, right? Like where you started led you into the kinds of work that you did for your doctoral studies. I think that's just so
Yeah,
incredible and interesting. And
yeah.
now that you've brought it up, would you be able to give us a summary of the work that you did for your doctorate that was
Sure.
later submitted
Yeah.
to the journal?
Yeah, I guess we bring ourselves to our study, our investigations, especially when we do qualitative studies. So anyway, yeah, I'll give a brief summary. The study was conducted in a rural Indo-Fijian community, which I'll call Dovubaravi. Dovubaravi families speak Fiji Hindi at home. Family members are second, third, fourth, and fifth generation descendants of indentured labourers who were brought to Fiji from the Indian subcontinent by British colonialists, mainly to work on sugarcane plantations. Plantation life was extremely hard for indentured families, and young children's mortality rates were very high. Dovubaravi was settled by a few families who completed their indenture in the early 20th century. They obtained 100-year leases on land from the Colonial Sugar Refinery Company. They built thatched houses to live in and laboriously cleared the land to grow and sell sugarcane. Away from plantation control, they organized their own families' lives by adaptively drawing on memories of family and agricultural life in India. These diasporic practices seem to have allowed Dovubaravi families to not only survive but to thrive. So that's kind of the background for the study. So the most Dovubaravi children live in a compound as part of their extended family, and a compound comprises a small group of houses, and the extended family usually shares a shrine, a vegetable plot, fruit trees, and domestic animals like goats, ducks, chickens, or a cow. And young children move freely around the compound and its houses, interacting with relatives who are engaged in household chores or relaxing together after work. So the study included all 11 Dovubaravi children aged under 3 years of age when I started data collection, and their 7 extended families. I engaged a Dovubaravi woman, Manju, who accompanied me to family homes for consent processes and data collection. Manju helped me translate between Fiji Hindi and English and shared her knowledge about local beliefs and practices. I used ethnographic methods to collect data over 26 weeks during 5 periods in Dovubaravi across 2 years. Data sources included audio recordings of semi-structured interviews of 2 community leaders and of the children's mothers. I made audio and video recordings of families' naturalistic communication with and around young children. I transcribed these recordings in Fiji Hindi and also translated them to English with advice from Manju. I took field notes of my observations of routine events and interactions, and I drew on published histories. I also recorded discussions with adult participants about the already collected data. I believe that involving participants in interpreting their own data is very important when researching any community with histories of colonization. I did not want to be perpetrating epistemic violence. There's been more than enough of that. So earlier I said that child rearing practices reflect caregivers' goals and beliefs about socially acceptable behaviour and talk. So in my first interview with the mothers, I asked them what they expected their children would be able to talk about by the time they turned 3. Every single mother said that they expected their child to be able to correctly address and refer to their familial elders. Now, language communities around the world have specific rules for speakers to use when talking to people of higher status than they are. And linguistic anthropologists call this honorifics. Honorifics can involve, for example, special grammar or gestures such as bowing or not looking directly at the higher status person. In Dovubaravi, honorifics requires correctly using kinship vocatives. When someone hails or refers to a family member using a specific word that labels how they're related to that family member, they are using a kinship vocative. So when an Anglo-American calls his mother mom, he is using a kinship vocative. In Dovubaravi, all speakers, no matter how old they are, must use the correct kinship vocative to call or refer to a family member who is older than they are. If a family member is younger than the speaker, however, the speaker calls them by their given name. There are a lot of kinship vocatives in Dovubaravi, as relationships are very carefully delineated. For example, you'd call your father's older brother's wife Dadi, and you'd call your father's younger brother's wife Kaki. And your Kaki would address your Dadi with another vocative, Barbie, which means my husband's older brother's wife. So my article provides details about ways that Dovubaravi adults help young children to learn to correctly use kinship vocatives. Because there's so many multi-party interactions going on in Dovubaravi compounds, some of these analyses drew on Goffman's ideas about multi-party frameworks. My analyses also build on another theory used in language socialization research, namely Bourdieu's theory of social reproduction. For example, it demonstrates how one Dovubaravi elder leveraged her institutional authority to censor her granddaughter's language and thereby maintain power relations within her family, and arguably the family's capacity to collaboratively withstand post-colonial forces. My article provides details about the indexicalities or deeper meanings of kinship vocatives in Dovubaravi and about how the children seem to be learning these indexicalities. It includes, for example, how children can gradually learn their family's consanguinity norms through the use of kinship vocatives during the annual Raksha Bandha ritual. And if you're interested in women's changing roles in the Indian diaspora or in how children acquire culturally approved identities and curiosities, then my article has something for you too.
What a wonderful summary, and I think it really encapsulates how interesting of a read it was. I mean, the way that you frame like the conversations, the translations, and then you explain the history of the community alongside the communicative practices. I thought it was a great read.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Well,
I
thank you.
also,
That's very kind. I
yeah,
think historical context is really important, especially in colonized settings, because it helps to explain why things are the way they are and how cultural practices have effectively afforded communities capacities to resist and overcome oppressions. So yeah.
wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that summary, and I invite everybody to check out the article if they haven't already. We've also published little kind of snippets of the article on our social media pages, so
Oh,
people,
okay.
you're more than
Right.
welcome to check that out too.
I will. I didn't
Yes,
know about that. If you
yes,
could
yes,
send me the link, that would be really helpful.
I sure
And I'll
will.
send you out the link for people in case they want to contact me or find out more about my other work.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
I will include that in the
Yeah.
video somewhere up here.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's been such a joy, Valeria, and I wish you all the best with your studies and your future career. And yeah, look, I'm sure you'll power it.
Uh,
Yeah.
Thank you so
And
much.
'cause I'm on the way out. I'm on the way to retirement, and the best thing I can do is make way for the next generation.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And seeing research like yours is inspiring as a scholar. So thank you so much. I hope
That's
you have
very kind.
a good day.